here is my amazing friend, Gregg Braden. How you doing?
Hey, Lynn, it's really good to see you. Am I early or am I late?
No, you're early. We decided to go live on
Okay.
Facebook a little early because it's a bit fiddly, and we wanted to make sure that we were there bang on time for all of the people who will be watching from all of our various pages. And also the webinar. We also have a webinar watching at this moment, and they'll be able to ask us questions during our time together.
Wow, Lynn, it's so good to see you. Thank you for the opportunity to share part of the day with our community and with you today. And I want to say we are having some intermittent internet problems. Uh, if I disappear, I am going to switch to a backup satellite system, and I'll be back as soon as I can. The reason I'm not using a satellite now is because there's a delay that makes a conversation a little awkward. So I'm going to try it without. But if the signal drops, I'll be back just as soon as I can. Okay.
Don't worry, don't worry. We know, and I'll yak a little bit to fill in that gap. Well,
All
and
right.
hope that everybody waits. But no, no problems. We're all used to internet problems,
Yeah.
these days, and we all forgive them because it's so exciting to be able to connect from around the world. And I know we're going to have connections around the world here today, Gregg. So
Yeah.
I've been looking at, before we start, just to let you know, I've been looking at your resilience course, which looks so brilliant. And I thought we could talk about some of the crossover we have and also talk about one of our favorite subjects, which is what do we do in these tumultuous times? How do we navigate through them? How do we create a new human? How do we create a new story? And Gregg and I are have been working together for the last 2 years on a course that we gave on technology, consciousness, and evolution. And so evolution is right in front of our heads all the time. How do we get through this time? So I'm delighted to talk to you about some of these big issues.
Well, Lynn, I am thrilled to talk about it as well. My sense is our time's going to go by very quickly. This is a dance. I'm happy to have the woman lead the dance. I'm just going to follow your lead, and we can go wherever you'd like to go with this conversation.
Wonderful, wonderful. So we'll start in just a minute, everyone. So let us know. I'm seeing in the chat, people are letting us know where they're calling in from, where they're watching from. And we'll have this opportunity, everyone who's on the webinar, to ask questions. And please, if you would, put them in the Q&A section. It's a little easier for me to read them out, and I'll be trading them back and forth between Gregg and myself.
Lynn, are you hearing any echo at all?
No, I'm fine. How about you?
If it's not on your end, I'm fine. There is a little bit. I'm not sure where it is, but I'm good to go. I just get to hear everything you say more than once. It's awesome.
My husband says the same thing. So I think we can begin, everyone. So thank you for coming to Conversations with Lynne McTaggart. And my guest today probably doesn't need any kind of introduction, but in case, in the amazingly rare and unlikely case that you haven't heard of Gregg Braden, he is a 5 times New York Times best-selling author. He's a scientist. He's an international educator. He is a renowned pioneer in that bridge between science and spirituality and social policy and also human potential. And best of all, he's my dear friend. So welcome, Gregg. It's so great to have you here.
Lynn, I'm so excited to be with you today. It's so good to see you and to be with our community in the way that we are. This is completely unrehearsed, unplugged. We really don't know what's going to happen today, and that's what makes it especially exciting. So thank you. I want to thank everyone that's tuning in, that's watching, for sharing part of your day with us today as well.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And for those of you who don't know who I am an award-winning, internationally best-selling author. I've written 7 books, 4 of them have been about the science of spirituality, and I've really focused on the new science, the science of intention, of new community, and most recently, the power of 8, the power of small groups to transform and heal our lives. So we're going to start this dance by just talking about resilience. Gregg, what do you mean by resilience? That's such
You
a
know, Lynn, it's a big topic. I remember when I was a kid growing up back in the 1950s, 1960s, resilience had a very different meaning than it can have to us today. In those days, when you had a tough day or you're having a tough time in life, resilience meant suck it up and get over it. pretty pretty much. And of course, all that's changed, and a lot of that change has been pioneered through the Stockholm Resilience Institute, where they have developed what we now call adaptive resilience. And I'm going to contrast that to traditional resilience. So, traditional resilience is when you're going along in life, everything seems okay, life throws you a curveball, and you have to climb your way back to the top. How fast can you spring back to some sense of normalcy? Adaptive resilience differs in the sense that it acknowledges that the world is changing. And because the world is changing, adaptive resilience says that we can take steps in our lives now so that we're already prepared for the changes, that we're already prepared for the curveballs. And they divide this. It's fascinating to me. So many different ways to look at this, but there are different domains of resilience. And I think this is a lot of people. I have friends that have lost loved ones in COVID. We have friends that have lost loved ones in war. We have friends that have lost their job, their income, their homes. And the resilience for them is how do I get back to this sense of normalcy? And while they may be able to do it emotionally, there are other domains that also need to be acknowledged. So when we talk about resilience, we're talking about physiological resilience. That's the state of the body, so that we can host this experience in our bodies. If we're not feeling good, nothing else makes any difference. But then there is mental resilience, there is psychological resilience, there is a spiritual resilience, and there is emotional resilience. And each of these domains, to have a full spectrum of healthy resilience, each of these needs to be acknowledged in some respect. So you mentioned the course. This is why I built the course the way I did. We're not advertising the course today, but you mentioned that, and it was the opportunity for me to develop those domains in ways that we sometimes don't think about, Lynn. So does that make sense if I say it that way?
No, absolutely. And the big key word you used, Gregg, was adaptive. I mean, the real key takeaway for us today is we're not going to go back to normal. We're not going to go back to what it was. We've changed too much and things have gone too far. Now, I want to say from the outset, though, this is not a bad thing. This is not a terrible thing. This is a good thing. This is what Irvin Laszlo called a bifurcation. We have a big fork in our road right now, and we can go back to the way things were sort of working, but not really, or we can design something much more extraordinary, something that works for far more people, and particularly for you. Because when we look back at the good old days, how good were they? And if we look at what our society was doing based on a misunderstanding of who we really are, a full scientific story, and Gregg and I talk about that a lot, a story that defined us as separate individual objects, well-behaved objects operating through fixed laws in time and space, and also highly competitive objects that did not have enough and so had to struggle with each other to survive. And that whole leitmotif in a word, in a sentence, has created the mess we're in now. because that idea of competitive individualism has created a situation with such corruption, with such greed, with such inequality, with no real understanding of how the body works and how to heal it, with ever more isolated situations. So we are becoming more and more and more isolated, not just from COVID, but because of the way we've designed our lives now, that we're now getting to the point, as they put it, where we're eating our own children. We're in all kinds of crises. And so life is forcing us to that adaptation. And from Gregg and my perspective, that is a really good thing.
Yeah. You know, Lynn, we were talking about resilience in general in the 5 domains, but now you're being specific about us and our world and where we are right now. And I think even those people that were skeptical that there was anything out of the ordinary happening are no longer skeptical. Everybody knows that that the world has changed, but the key is that, you know, there was a time we could have recognized this change was coming. Not necessarily COVID, but we could have recognized all the things that you just mentioned, and we could have navigated a healing that that would have served the world in a much gentler way. But humans don't seem to learn that way. We humans are very strange in that we appear to need to experience what we don't want before we know we don't want it. So, you know, we have a bad relationship and certain characteristics, and then we say, well, I don't want that. So, you know, we try to find a better relationship. Or, you know, we've done this, we had global war, and we said, well, we don't want that. And then we had to have another global war to say, we really don't want that. So the point is that now we're in it. We're in the change. And the only way out of the change is to go through the change. And what the resilience helps us to do is personally, and for our families, our communities, our society, our nations, hopefully come in for a little bit of a gentler landing, a softer landing as we come through this. And so now that we're talking about the world specifically, one of the most powerful things that any of us can do, and this is something people can do today, we as a society, Lynne, have never been given the opportunity to mourn the passing of the world that no longer exists. We cannot go back to what we knew in 2019 and before because it no longer exists. So I talk to people all the time that believe that, you know, we were going along the road of life and we hit this speed bump called COVID and lockdowns, and they're waiting for us to come down from the other side of that speed bump and go back to normal. We can't do that. Economies have changed. Businesses have disappeared. People's lives have been turned upside down. We can't go back. So the key, and I'm going to invite our viewers and our listeners to consider this. There is a beautiful new world emerging of hope and possibility and innovation and creativity that we've never seen before. Here's the thing. If your psyche and if your emotions are filled with the images and the expectations of what used to be in the past, of what was comfortable and what we were used to, if you are filled with those images, clinging to the idea of what should be, where is there room in your emotions and in your psyche to embrace the beautiful possibilities in your personal life and in our society? So when we talk about mourning, it doesn't have to be, you know, excuse me, it doesn't have to be a big, you know, visible display of mourning. It can be as simple as acknowledging to yourself and maybe saying out loud to those that are close to you, I miss the things that used to be in my world. I miss the little mom and pop shops that used to take care of me. Now everything's in a big box store. You know, Lynn, my family used to joke, I wear boots, and you know I wear boots because you've seen me for I don't know how many years. We've known one another. My family says I was born in boots. It's not quite true, but I miss the opportunity. If I had my boots and I was out shopping one day and a heel falls off my boots, I used to be able to walk into little mom and pop shops that I've known for 20 years, and they would fix it for me in 10 minutes. that that is pretty much gone right now, with rare exceptions. That is pretty much gone. I mean, it's maybe a silly example, but the little local businesses. So when we simply acknowledge, we say to ourselves, I miss the freedoms that I had only recently, and I miss the localized way of living, the localized ways of doing business. That's the first step in any resilience, because you open yourself then to the flexibility of new possibilities and the adaptation that we're going to be talking about. So that was not part of the course, but that is specific to where we are in our lives now. We all have lost, everyone has lost something. And the key to moving forward in a healthy way is to acknowledge and embrace that loss. And it begins with allowing ourselves to mourn, to acknowledge what we have lost in our lives. So I just
Yeah,
wanted to start with that, Lynn.
absolutely. I think that's so good. And funnily enough, I was just talking to my literary agent who is in New York yesterday, and he was telling me that he used to have a big office on Fifth Avenue, big, lovely office there. And he said, well, it was literally gathering dust for 2 years. So they disbanded it, and the whole team now work from home. And he said, well, I really miss just the human contact. We're always in contact. We use all of the technology now, but I really miss the human contact. And that is, and I've redesigned my work now. So I'm working now in coffee shops at, in various places. And he's had to completely redesign his life, and of course misses some of that. But here's the thing that we really want to impress on everybody out there. There is there are beautiful daffodils coming up from the ground of this desert that we're talking about now. There is this opportunity we all have to do this better. And I was so struck by something you had, Gregg, which was hope theory. And that's such an interesting theory because it is all about creating hope and how powerful that is as an agent of change and evolution. And when they talk about hope theory, and if correct me if I'm wrong, Gregg, but they talk about having goal-oriented thoughts. So this is very different from the kind of thinking we usually do. I mean, we have 70,000 thoughts a day, believe it or not. And when I work with people in my courses and I have them start looking at what they are inadvertently intending every day, pretty much 80% of that is negative. It's judgmental, my bum looks too big in this, everything from that to I hate her hair, to I'm never going to do this, to all of that sort of negative thinking. So imagine it now. And then the second part of hope theory is developing strategies to achieve your goals. Yeah. And finally, being motivated to expend effort to achieve those goals. So this is one of the big transformers. And so to me, that definition is very, very similar to what my definition is of intention, simple intention, a focused thought that is repeated, is connected to a goal of some sort, and is attached to a motivation to achieve that goal. And that thinking starts changing everything in the body, everything in the spirit, to something positive. So instead of becoming a victim of what is happening in your life, you become the driver.
Yeah. Yeah, Lynn, when I offer this in our live events and we do evaluations, people tell me often this is one of the highlights of an entire 4 or 5 day event. Of all the things we do, the conversation and the experience of hope theory. So I know for a lot of people, they say, what do you mean hope theory? Is this theoretical hope? Or, what, because we typically equate hope with something akin to wishful thinking. I hope it's not going to rain today, or I hope it's, I hope this relationship is going to work out. So, those are the way we typically think of hope. But I believe it was 1991 when a specific psychologist developed a way to quantify what we call hope. And he did it by breaking it down into actions and strategies. And he developed a template that we use. This is what people like to do. It's a 12 question template where they ask very specific questions, but you have no idea of how those questions are going to be used. Because if you did know, your ego would put down just the right answer so that it makes you look good on the template. And when it's all finished, what you find is of those 12 questions, 4 of them were just fillers. Four of them were not even useful. And 4 of them help you to know where you are in terms of your actions and where you are in terms of your strategy. And the value for this, so whether you're in a corporation or whether you're developing your own personal your personal goals in life, is often we are stronger. We might be stronger in the image of what we want, and maybe weaker in the strategy, or maybe we're strong in the strategies. We've got all kinds of support systems and social media and a team that's willing to help us, but we never were really clear on the goal of what it is that we really want to achieve. So somebody, for example, says, I want a better business. I want a stronger business. Sounds cool, but what does that really mean? Stronger in what way? Stronger in what areas? So you got a whole team working with you, but they don't have clear direction because you never really identified the goals. So the theory of hope theory helps us to quantify this. And one of the most powerful examples, Lynn, as I was researching this work, both for the book and for the course, I want to see how people have applied this in real life. And I think one of the most powerful examples. Can I tell the story of Terry Anderson? Are you okay if I share that?
Absolutely, please do.
Yeah, I'm fascinated with the real-time study of how people successfully navigate difficult times. And one of the most extreme examples of this was Terry Anderson. Some of you probably have never heard of him. Some of you were born after this happened. This was in 1980, I think it was 84, 85, somewhere right around there. I don't have it in front of me. But Terry Anderson was the Associated Press bureau chief in Beirut, Lebanon. And it was a very tense time in terms of political factions, and he was taken hostage. And it turned out to be the longest recorded hostage situation, almost, I think it's 2,455 days, almost 7 years that he was held hostage. And when he was released, he looked remarkably well. And when he was released in the interviews, and family and friends and TV networks, they were saying, how come you look so good? What kept you going? How did you make it? I mean, can you imagine? I mean, 7 years would be from now is 2014. Think back to how much has happened in all of our lives since 2014. That's how much of his life was spent in captivity, and a lot of it wasn't under pleasant conditions. We'll just say it that way. And what he said was he had a discipline. First of all, he believed that he would live, and that was important. He believed that he was of more value to the hostage takers alive than he would be if they took his life. And that in that belief, so that was a fundamental belief. That was the optimism, which was very important. And then he broke each day down into structured segments that he called doing time. This is what he called it in his book. He said, I would do time every day. And each day he had very specific segments where he would walk a certain number of steps in his cell, or he would do certain exercises, or he would do prayer. He would do writings. And it was that discipline that kept him. So those were the strategies and the actions that he actually put into place that very successfully helped him to navigate the most extreme hostage situation, one of the most extreme that we have on record. So it's more, I mean, it is a theory academically, but it works when we put it into practice. And this was one example of that practice.
Absolutely, Gregg, absolutely. And now, was he the hostage that also had another buddy that was also taken?
He,
And
so Lynn, you're in journalism. Do you remember when this happened? Do you
yeah,
remember?
I do remember it. And
Yeah.
I think he had a buddy, and those two had ways of communicating. They weren't even in the same cell. But I will put forward too that one of the things that probably kept him alive and thriving was knowing that there was somebody else there. And
Yeah.
that is seems to be a key element that I want to talk about anyway later in this, the whole idea of community and how powerful that is. But we're still just talking about thoughts and words and adaptation. And adaptation is all about thoughts. You know, everything in life is neutral. It's not good, it's not bad. It's how we judge it. So, and so I'm going to recommend that one of the powerful ways of looking at adaptation is after that stage of mourning, looking at possibility. And what we're talking about, as I say, with hope theory, it looks to me like, essentially an aspect of that is intention, the power of intention, creating that goal, making it goal oriented, like Terry Anderson's day in his cell was still goal oriented, creating that very specific intention. I mean, one of the things that I teach in my master class and elsewhere is the power of thoughts that are specific, because we usually think of an intention as I want to be rich, or I want a new relationship, or something like that. And I have found in my work on intention that essentially never works. What do you mean by rich? Most people don't really mean that they want to be rich in the sense of I want more things, I want more money in the bank. What they really mean is I want more time to be with my children, or I want to pursue a hobby, or I really want another job, or I don't want to work anymore, anything like that. And they think I want to be rich is going to do it. But those people, I think, who are successfully adapting understand that their thoughts are things that essentially create their world and affect other things. And certainly we see this in so much evidence about medicine. I think the fascinating thing, one of the real great studies that demonstrates exactly what you're talking about, Gregg, in terms of how we view life, was a study done by a guy called Ted Kapchuk, who is from Harvard University, and he also does acupuncture. So he was doing this study, and he put people into two groups who had carpal tunnel syndrome, all suffering from repetitive strain injury. And one group were given medicine, pills, and the other group were given acupuncture. And about a third of the group on both sides had terrible side effects and went to their bed and, were really suffering. But the majority got better. Now, here's the interesting part of it. The medicine that those people were given was just sugar pills. The medicine the others were given in terms of acupuncture was sham acupuncture. It had nothing to do with actual treatments. It was all about thoughts and words. It was all about their perception of something. And notice the people that thought they were going to be harmed were harmed, even though they were being given a sugar pill or a sham bit of acupuncture. People thought they were going to get better, got better. So this really tells us something so important about the power of changing the way we perceive what is going on right now and looking at opportunity and looking at change as opportunity and an opportunity, as I say, to do it better. But it really starts with that sense of thoughts. You can feel you're in a cage, you can feel you're in a cell, or you can feel that you have a job to do that day and you do it. So I want us to start thinking about some of that whole idea of thinking in a totally different way. And I was really struck by something else that you go on about, which is spiritual resilience, Gregg. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because I think that's so key.
Sure. Well, I'm going to back up about a half a step with regard to the thoughts, because what you're saying is so powerful. It's so true, and we hear it so seldom. The research I did in a recent book, I think you mentioned this, 60 to 80,000 thoughts in a 24-hour period. Many of those thoughts are the same thought. They're repetitive thoughts that we're playing consciously and subconsciously. The question is, where do those thoughts come from? And often they come from the world around us and what we're being taught or what we're being exposed to when it comes to the world. And I think it's no secret to anyone watching this, there is the ability for all kinds of media to influence those thoughts, whether it's social media or, on YouTube, or whether it's, we can't call it mainstream media anymore, Lynn, because there are more viewers on many of the podcasts than there are on CNN or MSNBC or Fox News in a day. So we can now call it legacy media. So I think it's no secret, legacy media, they have a perspective. And our friends will have a perspective, and YouTube videos will have a perspective. And if that is what's driving our thoughts, then we have to ask ourselves, are they true? Are they healthy? Are they serving us? When we turn all of that off, when we stop listening to the ideas and the thoughts of other people, and we base our perceptions on our own experience in the world, what's actually happening in your life, and how true is what you have been taught. And then we begin to develop, in my experience, much healthier thoughts. And I think the spiritual domain of resilience is a very important part of this, because it's when people hear spiritual domain, a lot of times they think, oh, you mean communicating with your angels or having religion of some kind, and that can be a part of it. But when it comes to resilience, the spiritual element of resilience is the meaning that we give to our lives. And this is one of the most powerful, one of the most fundamental elements. They're all important, but this is one of the most powerful of the domains, because when we get out of bed every morning, we need to feel that we have a purpose in life. One of the most profound studies that I did, I have a lot of work, and it's in the books and the courses on longevity and the human potential to live much longer than what we typically accept is an average human lifespan of 80 to 100 years. And there are very well documented cases of people living much longer than that. Not so much in the US in the Guinness Book of World Records, but it happens in other countries. So when I was spending a lot of time in Tibet, leading groups, it was common for the monks and the nuns to live 120, 130 years. And they had papers to show that. It wasn't just word of mouth. They would show us their papers. So I think one of the oldest women on record just passed. She was 132 when she passed. And when she was interviewed about why she believed that she had attained this longevity, she said, because of my family. They need me. She says, if I wasn't here, who would fix lunches for the kids before they go to school? Who would help them with their homework? Who would take care of all the chores while everybody else is left the house to go to work and go to school? Who would work in the garden to bring the food, and who would prepare the food for the evening meal? So she had this tremendous sense that her life was important and that she was needed. And I think I know that we all need this in some degree. The key is it has to come from within. We have to seek out and find for ourselves our own reason for living, our own purpose in life. And that can be a whole workshop unto itself. And it can change as we evolve and go through life. But it's not something that you can read in a book. It's not something you can get from a workshop. Can't tell you what your purpose is. A workshop can lead you through a process to help you arrive at that understanding for yourself. And what we do in the course and my programs and the books and things like that is we share the science of the discovery of neurons in the human heart that have their own neural network, independent from the neural network in the brain. And I'm saying this because our brain is a polarity organ, left brain, right brain. And if we try to solve problems by thinking about them too much, or relationships, or jobs, or whatever we're doing, our brain will always polarize our experience into good and bad, and right and wrong, and success and failure, and worthy and not worthy. Whereas the neural network in the heart is not a polarity, the heart's not a polarity organ. So when we learn to access the wisdom of the heart, which is the core of our most ancient and cherished spiritual traditions, when we ask the big questions of life, what is my purpose in life? From the heart, we don't go through the ego loops of success and failure and worthy and not worthy. And I believe, my experience is that we have a truer insight into what our life purpose, our life meaning is. And it's not an event, it's a process, it's ongoing. You could ask the next day and have a clearer answer. So when we learn to access the heart, I mean, simply touching the heart center to draw our awareness from our mind into our awareness will always go to the place in our body that we touch. So when you touch your heart center, your awareness is in your heart. And when you take a few deep breaths, slow your breathing down, and ask these questions from your heart, I think this is key. And when we find that purpose, it changes our physiology. It changes the way our neurons wire and fire. We begin to develop new neural circuits of feeling needed, healthier body chemistry, longevity enzymes are awakened, stronger immune response, greater resilience to life, all those things from this experience of being needed. So we could go on and on about this, Lynn, but in essence, that is the spiritual domain of the resilience that we're talking about here.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I've been exploring with and looked at in depth in finding your spiritual center and your purpose in life. And we found that that's so important. But the way I've been exploring it is with Power of Eight groups, of course, and I've been doing that for many years now. And I was inspired by a study from Harvard showing that when they went to communities all across America, they asked people how much money would make you happy. And they assumed that people were going to say 500,000, 1,000,000, that kind of thing. Nothing like that. What they said was enough money to pay my bills and a little bit extra. That was it. And actually, the ceiling was $75,000. And for a lot of people, that is just about what they need to pay their bills, to get their kids through things, and have a little bit extra. But that was it, not extravagant. What they did say, though, what was most important to them was living a life of service. And one thing that I've noticed in my Power of Eight groups and Power of Eight courses that I give is the frequency with which people use that to find a life purpose. Many people come and they say, well, my kids are grown up, now what? Or I left that job, now what? Or I want to leave that soulless job, now what? And oftentimes the group works so well for several reasons. Number one, you talked about turning off the brain. And what we've found in studies we've done with Power of Eight groups is that's exactly what happens. The parts of the brain that make us feel separate, that create our individuality, our very individuality, they're dialed down. And what we find is people are in a state of ecstatic oneness. And I think that oneness, that getting off of yourself, that feeling that actually experiencing your entity as part of something larger, as part of that quantum field, that thing that we never actually experience, we all know about, but we don't experience. People do in this group experience. And it oftentimes is a fast track to them finding their real purpose in life. I've also found, and I've experimented a lot with this, when people are undergoing a lot of negativity, their own or somebody else's, I will oftentimes say, hold on to that thing that you were born to do. And when people can find that, and as you say, Gregg, that's not in here, that's not in your head, that comes out of deep intuition in your heart. And oftentimes, that being of service, that altruistic piece that I find in Power of Eight groups, um, awakens that. I've had a couple of people in my current master class. One woman did an intention to find her purpose in life. And lo and behold, the group did an intention for her. And lo and behold, she came across this perfect charity that she got involved with that's helping refugees from Afghanistan. And her life is filled with purpose and meaning now. And I've seen this over and over again in times of trouble. I remember during Hurricane Sandy, a little local liquor store on the east side of Manhattan, all the lights went out, all the power went out. It was cold, it was horrible. And they started creating emergency power, and it became a hub of the neighborhood. People started showing up with, extra things. It became a place where you could power up your phone on this emergency power, et cetera, et cetera. And people were donating food, the restaurants were donating stuff. And it became a situation of a community that they never thought they had. And I think that's one other thing I want to address here. This whole necessity and power of a small community. We're sort of talking about resilience and the sort of qualities that we need to become a new human in this new time. But we also need to start thinking about a new community too. And that community isn't going to be coming from the top down. It's certainly not going to be coming from our media. I share with you, Gregg, the thought that our, legacy media is really responsible for putting us into a state of constant fear about COVID, about everything. And so many people I know have just decided, I'm not going to tune in anymore. It's just entering my body in a negative way. And I, as a journalist, have been, and an author, have been horrified at the way that the media has conducted itself through COVID. It has not asked the good, tough questions. It has just used it as a prurient way of creating more fear and more attendance, people having to watch the nightly news to find out the next calamity. So I wanted to start talking about new community. So what does this look like? For me, it looks so much like small groups. And that's certainly what I've seen, the power of it. This past year, we've had a woman who had detached retinas who was going blind. Her group did an intention for her. She has restored those retina. She's now, and then she then had to go on to get some cataract surgery. But her doctors before this said that wasn't going to make much difference. She has, I swear to you, 20/20 vision now. I mean, amazing. And I've seen the power of groups, small groups, manifest, power up that spiritual sense, that heart sense, but also create a new intention family. So I want to talk a little bit more, Gregg, about this whole idea that we have to recreate those communities that we've lost. We've lost those corner shoemakers. We've lost those mom and pop shops. We've lost that sense of local community. So we have to create something new. What are some of your thoughts on that?
Well, Lynn, excuse me, you just covered a lot of ground, and I'm happy that we're talking about community. I think at the very least, it's fair to say we're living a time of extremes. Excuse me. And what the 5,000 years of recorded human history tells us is that the key to navigating a time of extremes in a healthy way is localized living. Localized living, which is just the opposite of what we're being encouraged to do right now. We're being encouraged to centralize into large population centers where we rely on external forms of support for the things that we need in life. And history shows just the opposite is what has served society for 5,000 years in the past. So when I say localized, that means localized economies, localized finance, localized sources of energy, localized sources of food. You know, many of our communities already have farm to table, so we're familiar with that. And especially in time of extremes where we're seeing the breakdown of supply chains around the world, that's the result of centralized living, and that's where people get hurt. And the ones that get hurt are typically those that can least have the least resilience because maybe they're living paycheck to paycheck, you know, or they've got a little store where they don't have a big inventory and they rely on those supplies coming in. So localized living is the key, and it flies in the face of what we're being encouraged to do today. So when you talk about the legacy media and the fear, I think I agree 100%, and I believe that COVID simply forced to the surface in a way that it's very hard to discount something that has actually been happening over a longer period of time. People didn't want to see it. And that is that information is being used to divide us, to divide and break social alliances. You know, when it comes to, and the media feeding into this, you know, the media emphasizing the discrepancy between the 1% and the 99%, or the differences between men and women, or blacks and whites, or Christians and Muslim. Not that those things don't exist, they do in our lives, and we learn how to heal them. But when those differences become the focus hour after hour, day after day, and they go right to this primal instinct of fear that separates us, what happens, Lynn, is we break the social alliances, the healthy social alliances that come from community, and then we become much more vulnerable as families and societies and nations to other people's ideas because our collective ideas have fallen apart. So this is something to be aware of. Not that the differences don't exist, but that we are more than those differences, and that we ultimately, I believe, we may not always like each other, but I know that we love one another. And there are all kinds of studies showing how one human will risk their lives to save the life of another human at their own peril without even giving a heartbeat of a second thought, because we're hardwired to do that, because we do have this love for one another. So when it comes to the community, one of the most powerful things that I read, Lynn, I came across a study recently about what a human needs to survive. And the number one, we are water-based beings. We can't live long without water. But we can actually go a couple of weeks without food, as long as we have that water. Number two on the list was not food, it was community. We need social contact to be healthy. And this was the problem with the lockdowns and the breaking of family alliances and friendships and community alliances in the sense of isolation. And the isolation led to health problems, rise in levels of anxiety and depression, certainly. Health issues, the inflammation that comes from that leads to all, cardiac issues and all kinds of skin irritation. I mean, the list goes on and on. Suicides, certainly we're all familiar with that, and childhood suicide, sadly, because community plays such a powerful role to an adolescent in their formative years as they're defining who they are and their sense of who they are. So the bottom line, like, community is next to water. We need that more than anything. And it's nice to have physical community. It can be virtual community, or it can be a combination of both. But localized living supports community. That's the whole point. When we live locally, the community has to come together for those sources of energy or those sources of commerce, for food. You know, I'm coming to you today from a studio just outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico. Just north of where I am, there's a small community. It's Espanola, New Mexico. And I just drove past there on Sunday. There is right off the main road, there was a huge vacant lot, commercial property, pricey, nobody wanted to buy it. And a bunch of people came together and went to the authorities in the community, and they converted that vacant lot from commercial property to a community farm. And people come after work, they come on the weekends if they're not working during the day, and they're growing food in that farm, and that food goes to a farmer's market right there in the community. And it has brought people together that didn't used to know one another, and neighbors and friends and people that work in offices with people that work on tractors. And it has become a hub of the community, and it's a beautiful example of localized living, localized production of food, and the community benefits from that. So community is a powerful piece of our resilience in a time of extremes.
Absolutely, Greg. And I mean, that's certainly dear to my heart. When I researched my book, The Bond, and which was supposed to be an answer to Darwin, this whole idea that life has to proceed through struggle and competition. I wanted to know, were we hardwired to be competitive? And the resounding answer in my research was no. And as you say, I found that humans have several really important needs, and one of them is a need to belong. And as you say, other than water, we probably need that more than anything else. If you want to harm someone, what you do is ostracize them. That is reserved in indigenous cultures for the worst punishment of someone. Push them outside of the community. Or banish them, even worse. And as you say, when they look at suicides, they find that, or even heart disease, they find that they are typically, people kill themselves because they feel excessive individuation, as psychologists put it. They feel left out. And they also, the opposite of that, if you're looking for healing to heart disease or a cause of heart disease, it's half of the time it is simple loneliness. So, as you say, one of the terrible things about COVID is accelerating the path of isolation that we were already on the route of. I mean, we have already started to create around the world gated communities where we're only with people just like us. We have been more and more isolated via our technology, and now we're isolated because of a pandemic in many, many instances, and even more isolated because of fear. So one thing that I have found is a wonderful antidote to all of this fear, all of this polarization, is a Power of Eight group. And also intention on a large scale. I mean, one of the things that I've been experimenting with a lot with my intention experiments is bringing together polarized people. So for instance, with the inauguration, I had on a webinar participating in an intention experiment to heal any violence in Washington. Before the inauguration, we had on Republicans and Democrats, we had on police, we had on an African American, a former jihadist, we had a load of different people on, and people by the end were sending love to each other. And I've found this now I've done about 10 of these, always putting together people who are supposed enemies to see what happens. And what has happened when we've tried to analyze what has gone on, we found the University of California evidence about what happens with the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the longest nerve in the body. It's involved in the production of oxytocin. helps to regulate the release of the hormone oxytocin, which is our love hormone. That essentially, what they've discovered in these studies is when we do something altruistic, when we do something of service, like an intention experiment, we feel more love for everyone we come in contact with, in particular, the people who are not like us. So one of my antidotes to the individualism going on right now that's dangerous for all of us is small group intention, also bringing together people to do a little common intention, maybe for their neighborhood, maybe for the larger community, and deliberately bringing together people not like you. Because I think being part of that larger thing, the psychological word for it is a superordinate goal, a goal we can't achieve except by the participation of everyone involved. That creates a bridge across the divide, in my view. But as you say, Gregg, I think it's going to come down to moving away from this ever increasing globalization at the cost of local. And I think local has to be a way of gaining back the humanity that we're being lost, but also allowing ourselves to move through these times of change.
Yeah, Lynn, I love what you were saying, and I want to thank you for your work with the intention groups, and I love what you were saying about the night of the inauguration and bringing together seemingly disparate people representing seemingly disparate groups, and how when they were able to get to the true essence of themselves, they actually connected on a very deep level. And I know you've done this before with nations, entire nations and religious groups. And I've often said in our live programs, you never know who's going to be in the audience. So I'm always hoping, my hope theory, hoping in the audience, at some point, what I would love to see is the leaders of our nations, maybe the G20 or the G10 or the G7, whatever it is, get together in a room when they're not behind their technology from their nations, they're not behind their armies, and just look at one another and talk about their families and what they want for their people. And I sense that they would have, I think they're so locked into an old way of thinking that it would be a breakthrough for them to realize that they probably have much more in common than they have been led to believe in the past, and that it's okay to break out of those old ways of thinking. One of a man that I've just admired tremendously, unfortunately, I did not meet him personally before he died, but I'm good friends with people that did, that worked with him, is Buckminster Fuller. And one of the, I think, most powerful things that he said that applies to everything we're talking about today, he said, if you want change in the world, you're never going to create a better world by fighting against the things you don't like. He says, if you want a better world, find new ways to do things that are better than the old way, and people will follow the new ways, and the old ways become obsolete. And I think there's a lot of truth to that, because I know even in our community, Lynn, we have colleagues that do not understand this principle. And so they fight against what they don't want rather than put their life energy and their heart and their focus into and toward the new and the beautiful and the exciting things that are possible. I have friends in the military. I worked in the defense industry during the Cold War years, and I still have friends in the military. And I asked them once, I said, what happens if the next time they have a war and nobody shows up? You can only have a war if people are going to fight. And they said, don't laugh. Don't laugh, because there are military leaders now who, when it comes to these very intense meetings and the proposition of war comes up, they say, we will not do it, because war has become obsolete. There are no winners. Everybody loses. The old idea of war was somebody wins, somebody loses. Everybody loses now. So the old ideas of war have become obsolete. And that is a step moving in the direction of of working toward what we want in the world rather than fighting against what we don't want. I think it's true in relationships, intimate relationships, family, community, and I think it's true for the planet as well. But we can only do that, in my experience, the better we know ourselves, the better equipped we are to deal with whatever life brings to our doorstep in a healthy way. Resilience helps us to become the best versions of ourselves so that we bring the strength of our best self forward to create the best world possible. And I think that's really, Lynne, what your work is all about. Certainly what gets me out of bed, it juices me to get out of bed every morning. That's part of my purpose. And I just want to thank you for the community that you have created. You are such a, I don't even know, I know that you are a hub. I don't know if you know how and how powerful of a hub you are. World, a
And I think on that note, I guess I was such a hub, I've frozen him for the moment. So hopefully we'll come back. And Gregg, if you want to just turn your camera off and then back on again, I bet you'll come back. While he's doing so, I just want to say that one thing that I have discovered, and just to sum up before we take some questions, is I have discovered that a new community can be formed. You know, if you don't have people around you who are like-minded in terms of trying to try out some of these new ideas we've been discussing. So this idea of resilience, this idea of adaptation. There we go.
That wasn't supposed to be the end, but we had an internet drop. So
I know. I figured it's probably, you know, I was getting too much of a compliment here, and the internet said, it's going to go to her head. So yeah, we lost you, I think, around there.
Well, I'm back, and I just wanted to say those things before we get to the end of the program. Sometimes the program ends, and I walk away and I say, I wish I had have said these things. So I wanted to get them in before.
Thank you so much, Gregg. And I was just saying, I'm going to have us take a few questions if you can spare the time. I was just saying that one thing that I've found, because we're just to sum up, is we're talking about inner change. We're talking about inner adaptation, looking at things a different way, but we're also talking about the power and the resilience that a group can create. I've seen it. I have people over and over again tell me their Power of Eight group has become their intention family, and they feel incredibly close to these people. They have helped them make extraordinary change to heal their lives, whether it is their health, their relationships. I've seen thousands of cases of people healing estranged relationships, or changing their career, finding their life purpose, getting their finances on an even keel, all of those things, thanks to Power of Eight groups. And I think in terms of using this as a new tool for a new community, it doesn't have to be local to work, although I, like Gregg, am really in favor of local. But these virtual groups create family, and particularly in these times of lockdown and inability to see people, having that community to count on, to have your back, is just extraordinary. So in these times of transition, I really encourage you all to start looking at ways to bring these ideas about adaptation and resilience into your lives, looking at lots of Gregg's courses, all of his amazing stuff. Sounds like a book is going to come out of this too, Gregg.
Well, we have a book right now about resilience from the heart. Talks about the power of coherence, helping us with physiological resilience. There is a course. It's entitled Radical Resilience. It's on my website. It's the only place it's offered right now. so people can go to see that. And there is a new book. I have a new book that will be due March 31st. So I'm actually in book writing mode right now.
Okay, so we
Yeah,
can't wait for that, and we'll
yeah.
certainly let everybody know about it when it comes
Thank
out.
you.
And I am running my once a year course, the Power of Eight Intention Masterclass. So if you want to go on a whole deep dive with me for a year-long course with your own Power of Eight group, it kicks off on February 5th. So check out in the chat um, where you can get hold of information about it and have a look further to get a Power of Eight group of your very own, and also to go through what I like to call Intention Boot Camp. So let's take a few questions, Gregg. I'm going to go into our Q&A section here. Okay. Let's see. Um, okay, let's just give you this one, Gregg, because I know this is something you like to talk about. You say that climate change is actually naturally occurring. If so, how long will it last, says Ed?
Wow, we just did a huge switch up in our our topics here, Lynn.
I
So I'm
know.
for I think most of my community knows I am a degreed earth scientist. I'm a degreed geologist with a strong background in the life sciences and the relationship between earth and biology and our bodies. This is a big topic. What I'll say briefly, if humans were not on the earth, we would still have climate change. That's not what we're being told, but that's what the data shows us. You go into the ice cores in Antarctica, they go back 420,000 years very clearly, and other sources go back even before that, showing that the Earth goes through these rhythms. Now, we have contributed to the climate change, and we need to stop burning fossil fuels. And I want to say that we've had the technology to do that for over 60 years. If the powers that be were really serious about cutting out CO2 emissions, we've had the technology to do that. And there's a big conversation about why it's not being used now. What the historical data shows is that global warming or climate change, it's intense. The warming is intense, it's brief. And it's what happens after the warming that typically is a bigger problem than the warming itself. This is not the warmest that the Earth has ever been. It's been much warmer at times in the past. The medieval warming period is a perfect example. But the cycles are intense, they're brief, and then we go into a cooling, not necessarily an ice age, but it doesn't take much cooling in the climate to change the weather. And these are two different things, climate and weather. Climate is the global phenomenon, weather is what happens locally. So when it rains, when it snows, when it's hot, when it's cold, how long the growing seasons are affected in the cooling. And we are moving into that cooling now. It's a hot topic in the UN with the climate panels. And unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation to skew thinking into taking certain actions that benefit some people, but they are not necessarily the actions that are going to help us and remedy what we're experiencing. So, long answer to a short question. There's a lot more we could do with that, Lynn.
Okay, absolutely. I thought some people may be asking this. So, okay, so someone said, Ed asked, is self-healing possible with a 20-year opioid addiction? Ed, absolutely. I had a woman in my master class last year who had a 22-year antidepressant addiction. So she was on antidepressants. I had somebody else who had a sugar addiction for about the same time. And with the help of their group and a very focused intention, both are off. The woman on antidepressants never was able to step down, to slowly withdraw. And she was able to do so without any side effects. And the woman with the sugar addiction, it was affecting her sleep. She would get up and binge eat in the middle of the night. It was affecting her marriage. And all of that healed thanks to the power of her group. So, and I have something else that people have asked too. I'll just throw this in too with Mary, said, how do you explain biophotons related to our manifesting out of biological space? Now, what we can say is, we understand that at a fundamental level, we are all essentially vibrating packets of energy. That's our subatomic particles. And many scientists have demonstrated that when people do an intention, they change the biophotons that they send out to the world. We're all emitting a tiny current of light. So when healers are sending out intention, their light essentially increases. According to work we've seen at the University of Arizona and many other places. So it looks like that light has something to do with changing and manifestation. So when I talk about a Power of 8 group and why it works so well, I say this. Number one, the power of intention. That thoughts are energy, they're energy that affect other energy, and that everything out there is energy. Number two, there is a strong altruistic piece here. When people do things for other people, goes back to our spiritual resilience idea. When people do things for other people, they live longer, healthier, happier lives. It's been demonstrated in so much science. So the altruistic piece is something. The power of groups. I just read some amazing evidence, Gregg, talking about, we all know about attachment theory, right? That, babies need to feel they belong and connect with their mother, or that can affect them later in life. I just read some evidence demonstrating that groups can heal that for people who do not have that sense of love and attachment, did not receive that. A group effect can heal that. Now, they were talking about adolescent kids, troubled kids, but that has to be the case with all kinds of groups. So there's a group effect here for intention. And finally, there's a whole lot of magic. There's a whole lot of magic we don't completely understand, but I can tell you, watching thousands of people heal. I've had 2 people get out of their wheelchairs in the last year and a half from the power of group intention. It definitely works. So Gregg, people are asking about, it's interesting, they're saying, we've had several questions about how to counter all of the negativity going on television and about COVID, the fear. Here's one from Monica. How can we as individuals change the course of the scary way governments are dealing with this virus? I understand resilience, but in some of the aspects, like a lot of less freedom, be a bit dark. And a lot of people are asking about freedoms, losing freedom of choice, freedom of speech. Anything you want to say on that, Gregg? We've just lost him again. So I'll speak till he comes back. I think that there is a bit of fight back going on. I think a lot of governments, in my own view, have gone way too far, and technology has gone way too far in suppressing freedom of information. However, I just heard about a case being held in court with a doctor here in the UK who was told by the General Medical Council here to take down a YouTube video he had, which essentially disagreed with the government's position and the medical community's position on COVID. This is a doctor in the UK, Gregg, and he took them to court. He took the General Medical Council to court for stopping him and also for suspending his license because he was speaking up against the government position on COVID, the medical community's position about how to treat COVID, and complaining about it on YouTube. He was told to take it down, was suspended. He brought it to court and he won. He just won his case. So that is an interesting precedent about the right to freedom of speech, the right to freedom of treatments. So I think that is going to be an interesting piece of this. Now, let's see if Gregg can come back while I read another question. And I think the other thing about this is we all have to be little Jedi Knights here. I think we all have to make our voices heard if we are feeling that there is a lack of freedom. I look at what Moscow just recently did. There's Gregg. I look at what Moscow did. Oh, hey, Gregg, are you back? Did you want to say anything about freedom and regaining our freedom in these times?
I'm not sure when I dropped off, Lynn, and I apologize. We're having,
Don't worry. Don't
yeah,
worry.
we're obviously having internet problems. Well, can I go back and talk about intention briefly?
Sure, please do.
Because I think this is so important. You were talking about why intention works the way it works. I had the opportunity to be in Geneva, Switzerland a few years ago at the CERN superconducting supercollider, where they recreate the beginning of the universe and study what the properties were that were happening in those first few fractions of a second. And one of the things they found was that there is a field that was formed early on, and that field continues today. So that no longer is a metaphor. It's we know this field exists. But even today, Lynn, when I go to conferences, here's what happens. The scientists will say there's a field out there that connects all things.
Mhm.
Here's what they're missing is that the average human body has about 50 trillion or so cells. Every one of those cells has 100 trillion or so atoms, and this is where it gets really, really beautiful, because every one of those atoms is constantly emerging and collapsing into the field. So it's not that the field is out there, we are the field, and our consciousness is what determines the template for who we are in that field, because it's not fixed, it's malleable. The time when the atoms are emerging and collapsing is an opportunity for change. It's not set in stone. So the intention that you're describing and the things that we talk about in terms of seeing ourselves a resilience in the heart, what we're doing is we're modifying the template of those atoms as they're emerging and collapsing. So when we feel the feeling of a healing in our bodies and we see ourselves as healed in our bodies, that is the template that we're giving this energy to now build from. And I think for people that have a heart, they think it's just some mysterious, there is a mystery in here, but it's a beautiful mystery, and it's a beautiful mystery. This helps us to begin to understand that we are part of, rather than separate from, these experiences, because we've been conditioned to feel that we need something outside of us to be healthy and successful in life. And what we're finding is that all of this technology in the world around us actually mimics what we already do in the cells, except our cells do it better. And we self-regulate through thought, feeling, emotion, belief, breath, and focus, all of which are part of intent. So this helps us to understand, I think, why the intention works. And once our brain kind of knows there's a mechanism, it frees us to go deeper into the process, because we're not saying.
Mm. And I know Gregg is just frozen again, but this is the thing. We do have science now that describes this, that explains that we're very different. And this science is being accepted now. I mean, even Nature, the scientific journal, now says that everything is mental, everything is energy, and acknowledging that consciousness is a creator, consciousness is our reality. So when we start thinking about life as very different from what we've been told in our, our mainstream science, that we are a vibrating packet of energy interacting with other vibrating packets of energy around the world, and that we are part of this field. We're not outside this field. a lot of people say, well, I'm entering the field. And I always say, well, you're already there. You're already in the field. You just have to understand that and make a mental leap about how you operate in the world. And when you do, all of this makes sense. The power of intention makes sense. The power of group intention to heal things makes sense. So I'm noticing a number of people are asking, what about how to deal with things in this dark time? Somebody asked about their 10-year-old being ostracized, other people talking about being ostracized. That is another reason to create essentially a new community. And it can start small. It can start with the Power of 8 group. And those will be your new community. But I also encourage you to do intention, and to do intention for yourself, to connect with people who are not like you, to get involved with Power of 8 groups where you are doing altruistic intention a number of times, where you're not always getting intention for yourself. Most of the time you're giving it. And that has an extraordinary effect on your heart. And that will connect you to the people who are essentially, frightened and therefore ostracizing you. With the young girl, I would ask her to do the same. Kids are really great at Power of 8 groups, and it will help heal her. And if you bring some of her other friends in, maybe just on Zoom, it will heal them too. So I think Gregg is having a lot of struggle with his internet today. I'm going to see if there's any final questions, and then I'm going to say goodbye for both of us. So we have a question about, with 1,000 people, a toxic lake became alkaline. We've done a lot of water experiments. How many people of us are needed to focus on the same thing at the same time to shift the world toward homeostasis quicker in a safe fashion? What I have discovered in my intention experiments and also in my Power of 8 groups is size doesn't matter. What matters is experience. I've seen the biggest change with a group of people who were healing professionals, so they understood about the power of intention. And why not create a huge intentional group as the experiments you've done, Lynne? Well, I do that all the time on Facebook, etc. We did a lot for COVID. What I want to do, though, is I'm really interested in creating small groups and starting with small groups, because I've seen them heal people's lives. I've seen them create. I've had one woman in my group this past year who needed 350,000 Arab, I think it was Arab money, it wasn't dollars. And she manifested, her group manifested it for her. I've seen other people who were in the emergency room told by their doctor, this is one guy with sepsis, told by his doctor that he would probably lose function if he didn't die. He was healed in 10 days thanks to the power of his wife's group. And he was able to leave the hospital, and they carried on with their holiday as planned. I've seen extraordinary healings. So let me encourage you to do that. Let me encourage you, as Gregg said, to look to adaptive resilience. We're on to a breakdown now. We're experiencing that breakdown now of everything that we have loved and cherished. However, we're also on the path to something better. We can do it better. We can create something better. I have found over and over again in all of my research, in all of my writings, that the way to start is in a small group. That has been the agent of change with everything that has ever come. Whenever there's been any big change in the world, it has come from a small group. So, Gregg, hi.
Lynne, we just took up. we
Yeah.
took a big power hit. All the power was down. I'm on a backup satellite system that has a little bit of a delay. So I
Oh,
apologize if I speak over your sentence, but I think it will be good for the rest of the Q&A. So
great. Okay. I didn't know whether you were going to come back. Thank you so much for doing so. Let's see. Um, let's see what. Okay. Um, okay. Let me just see if we've got. Um, Interesting one. Some scientists say that new planets are forming right now, and all that we are experiencing is in conjunction with what's happening out there. So, what could be the continuity? Who's influencing whom? Resilience refers to the universe as well. How big is our impact actually? Any thoughts about that?
yeah, there's so many different ways to look at this, Lynn. When I was in school back in the 50s and 60s, we were taught a story about the universe and our relationship to it. And we're still teaching the same story largely to our young people. And that story was that we're the product of a dead, inert universe, the product of lucky physics, and that we are the product of lucky biology and random mutations. The problem is the data does not support that story. So the emerging story is that the universe is actually alive, it is conscious, it is intelligent, the universe behaves as a living being. When there's a disturbance, when a star collapses in one part of the universe, other parts will compensate as if they were part of a living system. And I think this emerging story, it's a beautiful story, it's a holistic story that says we are part of rather than separate from the world around us. Now, we may not know that locally, in our living room, but I think the work from the Institute of Heart Math is taking us light years to understand our relationship to the world around us, showing that through the magnetic field of the human heart, we are deeply attuned to the magnetic field of the planet we live on. It actually brings us together in ways that we're only beginning to understand. But the magnetic field of the earth, it doesn't work in a void. It is deeply influenced by the magnetic fields of the sun, and the sun is influenced by our solar system and the universe beyond. So we are part of a system rather than separate from. It doesn't necessarily change what happens in our day-to-day lives, but it can change our thinking about our relationship to the world. And what heart math has shown very clearly is that coherence, when we create biological coherence between the heart and the brain, that's good for us, but it's really good for the planet because we become more socially cohesive. We become more willing to cooperate and solve our problems in the presence of that coherence. And that's a beautiful, beautiful thing that the science now is bearing out in ways that were only metaphors and theory just a few years ago. So that's a big topic, Lynn, a long answer to a short question, but I hope that helps a little bit.
I mean, I'm going to throw in one thing even crazier, Greg. We saw, Brian, my husband, just saw two pieces of research saying that uh, two scientists had information. They decoded some information. It was just essentially binary writing, binary information that when decoded was from other terrestrial beings and extraterrestrial beings, basically saying, hey, you guys on Earth, you've got to do things differently, or you won't survive. And so I want to just throw that piece out. We're not going to really talk about, ETs or anything else like that, but just if that is true, then the rest of the universe is supporting this change, is basically saying this is a good thing. And we want to encourage you to that thinking too. I'm going to, and somebody asked about extraterrestrial beings as a source of help for humanity's future. Uh, this was the conclusion of these two scientists. Somebody asked if a group, Power of Eight group, could help heal uh, her daughter of scoliosis. I've seen that several times. I actually was in an audience of a course I was giving, and the guy was very bent over with scoliosis, and we observed Daniel, his name was, his spine straightening up. It was really quite incredible. But we've had some amazing healings. We can't say definitely yes, but sure. We've had many, many instances of spinal problems being and challenges being sorted.
Well,
Um,
Lynn, can I speak to that just for a minute?
sure.
When people are asking these specific questions in general, as a scientist, what I'd like to share with our community is that right now, every organ, gland, and tissue in the human body have been documented scientifically with the ability to stop deterioration, to reverse disease, and to heal disease, even organs we were told could not. Pancreatic tissue, spinal cord tissue, heart tissue, brain tissue. But the key is they have to be given the proper environment for this healing. Now, what does that mean? There are all kinds of environments. There are nutritional environments, environments that we create through taking supplements. The climate, the weather environment, all those air, water, all those are important. But the most important environment is the inner environment that we create through thoughts, feelings, emotions, beliefs, breath, and focus. And that is where intent comes in, and the power of intention, why it is so powerful. But what I want you to know, the answer to all the questions, can this be healed? Can this be changed? The answer is yes, it is possible. And to follow up with that, we have to give ourselves the environment. It's an epigenetic process, the epigenetic environment that allows our body to do what our body knows how to do very, very well. So I wanted to throw that in, Lynn.
You betcha. And please understand that intention is an epigenetic process. And that, of
Yeah.
course, Gregg and I know from our dear friend Bruce Lipton. We're talking about a little set of atoms that sit above every gene and determine whether those genes get expressed. And what turns them on is not our DNA, but our environment, the water we drink, the air we breathe, the food we eat, the friends we have, one of the biggest things, the community we surround ourselves with, all of those things determine whether those genes get played or not. They're like the keys of a piano. So we're seeing the power of intention over and over again to heal stage 4 cancer, to heal just about every illness. As Gregg says, anything can be healed and everything can be healed. And what we really want to focus ourselves on is not only healing you, but healing the planet together. So we've come to the end of our time. There've been great questions. Thank you so much for persisting, Gregg, in coming back on. We appreciate it so much that you're on special extra power to be with us today. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening in. Gregg talked about all of his fabulous courses, his upcoming book, his current books. He has so many brilliant bestsellers. Check out everything tell us your website, Gregg.
It's very easy. It's greggbraden.com, Gregg, two G's, Braden.com, and it'll tell you about everything that we're doing, and that's the courses are on there. Radical Resilience is the course that links most strongly into what you and I have talked about today, Lynn.
Thank you so much. And for me, my Power of 8 Intention Masterclass, I give one a year. I put you through Intention Boot Camp on a live and interactive course on Zoom. And then we put you into groups for a whole year. And I put you in intention clinics once a month You can come on and ask me questions about just about everything, but the real magic and healing happens in your groups. So if you're interested in that, please check out my website, lynnmctaggart.com. In the chat, you'll see links directly to that course, but there's also a little tab at the very top. So I hope to join you. I hope you'll join us with that course this year. Thank you so much, Gregg, for spending all of this time. It was an amazing conversation, as always. And I look forward to the day when you and I can do something together again in person.
Lynn, I look forward to that day as well. Thank you so much. And thank you for your patience with our tech, our internet drops. And I don't know when we're going to be together, but I know that it's going to happen. And I'm excited for the opportunity, either on your continent or my continent. So I look forward to our next. Thank everyone for staying with us today. And just for all that you're doing to be the best version of yourself and make this the best world possible. We love you all.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Gregg. Take care now.